Hey everybody, I'm really excited about today's episode. I talked with my friend and fellow entrepreneur Eryn Schultz, and we had a really great conversation about building financial literacy. Eryn shares about the mindsets that hold us back from getting clear and actionable with our finances, and about how her company, Her Personal Finance, aims to demystify personal finance specifically for high-achieving women. Eryn takes her incredible depth of knowledge from her days of management consulting, Harvard Business School MBA program, and corporate leadership roles, and she combines it with a humble and accessible heart of an educator in the courses she designs and leads. And we got a taste of all that in this episode. I so enjoyed learning from Eryn in this conversation, and I can't wait for you all to learn too. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Eryn Schultz. Thank you for joining this episode of the Building Thinkers podcast today. I'm so excited to be joined by my friend Eryn Schultz. And today we're going to be talking all things financial literacy. We're going to be talking about maybe some 401ks, high achievers, and just our mindsets about money. So first of all, Eryn, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I'm so excited to dig in.
It's so great to be here, Tracy, and we've known each other for a really long time, so excited to be reconnecting as we're both on this entrepreneurial journey.
I know, it's so fun. Okay, so we do like to start with a little bit of, so how have we known each other? Is there anything kind of funny about that or any background there?
So we went to middle school and high school together. And what I think is particularly funny is Tracy was always my friend on the cross country team. And my husband is actually a big runner and did cross country in high school. And when he tells me all his cross country stories, I always think of you and how I should have been out there doing hill work with you at 7 a.m. in high school. But I was instead getting ready to travel to debate tournaments on the weekends, which I loved as well. Wish I could have done both.
Cross-country times were very good times. Thank you for bringing me back to that, because I think that was a lot of just really helpful mental toughness that really helped me go on to play lacrosse. And so I thought often when we were doing workouts in college lacrosse about just the things that our coaches from cross-country taught us. Shout out to Coach Lambert and Coach Mitchell.
And there was an Olympian that came out of their program, which I was not Olympic level. So that's pretty exciting that they've upped the ante.
Yes, that was not us, but I'm glad that they have now achieved Olympic status. That's exciting. Okay, Eryn, we'd love to start with what's your story? And in particular, as we're talking about building thinkers, tell us a little bit about what you're building now. You have an incredible background and story, so take it away.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Always tough to answer that question because there's so much you could include, but I think it's probably good to even start and say everyone in my family is an entrepreneur. My dad runs the business my grandfather started. My mom has always had her own business. My grandmother started a stationery business out of her house. My uncles. So this is sort of in my blood. But I started my career in corporate America, and I've always kind of been a bleeding heart and really thought that I was going to spend most of my career in the nonprofit sector. And I think we actually share a big interest in education. And I went to business school kind of in the back of my mind thinking, okay, maybe I want to start a business. I worked in management consulting for 5 years and really enjoyed the skill set I learned there. But you're always assisting. You're never the one actually executing. And I was really hungry for that. And so was blessed to get to go to Harvard for business school and came out and thought I wanted to work in the food space. And so took a job working for a big Texas-based retail chain, H-E-B. And when I was there, I kept overhearing people having conversations about the 401k plan. And people weren't sure how to sign up. They had a great match, but there wasn't a lot of education or awareness about, how do I pick between a pre-tax or a Roth 401k, how much should I be contributing, how much can I afford to contribute? And so I started to have a lot of these conversations at work, and then this would trickle into my personal life and became kind of obsessed with talking about 401k with my friends and realized that most of my friends had the same exact questions that my colleagues at work had. And this would be kind of women with MBAs from really prestigious schools or kind of who otherwise were very successful in their careers, and sort of realized what a dearth of financial education there was out there. And I think in my heart, I am a teacher. I'd thought about doing Teacher America after college. My parents talked me out of it, honestly, because for a variety of reasons, but I think teaching is not the most highly paid, I'll say, profession. And so ended up starting a business really focused on financial education, and starting by talking to the audience that I know best, which is higher earning women, and particularly focusing on people with grad degrees who have a lot of debt generally, but also high earning potential and aren't really sure how to navigate that.
Love it. It's so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And maybe we can dig into what have you learned now as you're thinking about her personal finance and the teaching that you've been doing there? What things do you keep hearing coming up, and maybe from your friend conversations as well? What things do you keep coming up against? Because I'd imagine as you're building a course, for example, you recognize that there's certain learning objectives and things that you're after. And so much of this seems to me around mindset. Is there anything that you've learned specifically there about why, in particular, high achieving women, because it almost is surprising, right? That somebody that has an MBA from these prestigious universities doesn't have that knowledge. I think people would assume that you'd learn that, or that you'd feel comfortable translating it from business to personal. So is there anything that you've learned or seen around the mindsets that you think contribute to that gap?
It's a really good question, and I would say people often, and this a lot has to do with their upbringing, will either have a scarcity mindset when it comes to money or an abundance mindset. So there are some people for whom it doesn't matter how much money they have, and sometimes they grew up in families with a lot of money. They always feel like they want more. I was just talking to someone I'm close with, who I talk a lot about money with, and they are in a position where all of their material needs are met. They have kind of enough money, and yet they're always in a position where they're feeling uncomfortable spending any kind of money. And I sort of said, what's that coming from? And they said, well, you never know what you might need it for. And I think that there is some percentage of people for whom money is scarce, and they could have $10 million and they would still feel like money is scarce. And then there's other people who I think sometimes feel like money is abundant, and these aren't always the same, but sometimes you can be making a 6-figure salary and be single. I'm a new mom. I know you have 2 kids. Once you have kids, things get a lot more expensive. But even in that stage of life where maybe it's just you that you're responsible for, you can feel like, oh, I'm going to go shopping this weekend and I'm going to spend a lot of money. And I think sometimes we don't always appreciate how much we're spending. So sometimes I have to sit down with people. The first exercise in my class is to think about how much money you're spending, and to really do a very detailed accounting of how much are you earning and how much is going out and where are you spending that money. And sometimes people will do that without looking at their credit card statements. And part of my class, I meet with people one-on-one, and sometimes I have to have kind of a tough conversation where I say, okay, you say you spend $4,000 a month, but let's look at this credit card bill because something's not adding up here. And we look at the credit card bill and it's twice that. And I think sometimes that is from a money abundance mindset. And sometimes if you grew up without a lot of money stress, it can feel like there's always enough money. And so you've never maybe built that muscle of having to pay attention to where you're spending money.
It's so interesting. As you were talking, it was making me think about this quote that came from John Acuff, who's an author, and he specifically said, he attributes it to his therapist, and he said that skills learned in danger require danger to be effective, to work. And I have seen this to be true across a variety of mindsets, but I think in particular around money with friends and other relationships that I've had, that oftentimes when there is kind of this scarcity mindset, maybe let's say from a family of origin in which something occurred and then a job loss or something like that, then creates actually some trigger later to where even when it is more abundant, thinking to your point that you just said, like you never know what's going to happen. Maybe that does come from an experience that somebody has had, or a comparison situation in which maybe compared to the people that one went to school with, for example, it seemed like the perception was this family has less. We live in a 1-story house and everybody at this school has 3-story houses. And so a beautiful one-story house that would be somebody else's dream in comparison feels like less and creates a scarcity type mindset when maybe it's plenty and enough in another scenario. It's just been something I've been thinking about in preparation for this episode, this concept of how deeply interwoven money is to our feelings of safety and security and lots of connections to family of origin, that sometimes you find that you become kind of like a money therapist in your work.
Yes, for sure. I would say it spans both sides of the spectrum, if you will. So sometimes I will have conversations. I work a lot with doctors who I think stereotypically are high earners and in reality are high earners, but also have a long period of training where they are not high earners and have a lot of debt. And so that creates a lot of money pressure when you're a resident, and then all of a sudden you finally make your attending salary. But some of them, I think, end up really feeling like money is scarce because of those years in training. And so kind of giving them the freedom sometimes to say, hey, let's look at your financials. You're actually in a really good spot. And I've had conversations with people who are afraid to have kids because they don't feel like they have enough money. And I'm looking at the numbers and I'm saying, you're in a great spot. And then on the flip side, sometimes that conversation is having to get tough with someone and say, hey, like if you keep spending the way you're spending, you're not going to achieve the things that you want to achieve.
So as I'm thinking about, having those types of conversations, one of the things that we like to ask, and this is along the lines of sometimes there's so much complexity in different areas and different industries. So in this case, there's a lot of complexity around money, financial literacy, 401ks, IRAs, tax code, and all of those things. And so what are some of the things that you've learned? We can take each of these a little bit piece by piece, but what are some of the things that you've learned? And sometimes the nice sentence stem is, if only people knew that.
The first one I would say, and I think I hear this a lot from women, is if only people knew that having a 401k is investing. I think we feel like, especially over the past 2 years where everybody was making so much money, it felt like in the stock market and crypto, and I think people had so much financial FOMO, and everybody wanted a Robinhood account, and they wanted to be, or they felt like, should I be investing in meme stocks? Should I be buying Bitcoin? And I think that those are fair questions to feel, but I think that just to start and recognize, hey, my workplace has a 401k and it's not sexy, and most people are like, I know that there's some tax advantages to this, or they call it a tax preferred account, but I don't really know what that means. But to sort of recognize that even though you're not picking stocks in your 401k, they have a default investment most of the time that's a very unsexy diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, but that if you're lucky enough to work for a corporate employer, they're doing a lot of the hard work for you, and that starting with a 401k is probably going to get you 90% of where you need to go. If you're a really high earner, you're probably going to need to do more than just your workplace account, but that's a good problem to have. And I think that a lot of people feel like, oh, if I am not picking individual stocks, I'm not investing, and that's not the case.
Yeah, and so to build on that, what are some of the reasons maybe that you've found that people don't even do that step? That they maybe don't roll over a previous 401k, or like when they're shifting jobs, or don't take advantage of what's already there? Is it lack of knowledge and understanding? Is it overwhelm? Is it combination of all those things? Have we made it overcomplicated? Like head in the sand?
I'd say two things. One, for something like an old 401k, there's no urgency. So, and I'm thinking a lot about parenting because I have a 4-month-old, so it's very top of mind for me. Figuring out how to start him on solids or how to make him sleep through the night, there is a burning platform. The sleep one for most parents, I've been blessed, he's a good sleeper, but potty training, all those things, they have to happen. You don't have so much flexibility around them. Your old 401k, there is not anyone standing in front of you saying, oh, you've got to do this. So all of us are busy people. When we're trying to weigh, how do I spend my limited time? No urgency. And the second one, I think, is the overwhelm piece, and that there's too much information, I think, available to all of us now. And so people, I think, are wondering, should I read a book? Should I pay a financial advisor? Should I listen to a podcast? And we're trying to navigate through all of that. And so sometimes we just don't do anything. And it's funny you brought up the 401k one, because I was just editing. One of my alumni was kind enough to record a video, and she talked about the impact class had on her, and she talked about her old 401k and said, I knew I shouldn't leave it behind, but I just didn't know what to do with it. And I think one of the things I love about the classes I've been able to build is that it's not just kind of, okay, here's like the things you should be doing pie in the sky, but I make people do exercises to really dig in on their money. And I think that helps people really take action. So when you have to go track down that old 401k and there's an assignment and it's time bound, sort of trying to create that urgency to help you help your future self.
I love it. That's just making me think about, that's just good learning right there. So like you understand the connection, and then the action step of not just in theory. So you could have a list that just says roll over old 401k, but that's still nebulous until it goes down to the steps. Okay, I have to find that account. I have to figure out what are the steps to go from where it is now to where I want it to be. And so I think that's so powerful to hear, just the recognition of that particular gap, and then also the connection between mindsets and behaviors, and how it sounds like in the exercises and activities you recognize both and their connection there to like the psychology of all of that. Is there anything else, any other ideas around this, if only people knew, that you've kind of come to?
Maybe the other piece is that it is okay to make mistakes with money. You don't want to put all of your retirement in your friend's LLC startup, or, put all of your retirement in a single stock. Maybe those are two sides of the same coin. So you don't want to take too much risk, but I think sometimes people are so afraid to just take even a small step that it keeps them from doing anything. And yes, there are definitely pitfalls to be wary of, and I'd say totally outsourcing your finances is another one that I think people should not do, to just say, I'm trusting my spouse even to totally manage my money. Because even if you have the best relationship in the world, if something happens to that person, and for women, we tend to outlive our male partners if you're in a heterosexual relationship. And so you can be setting yourself up that at 60, you get kind of a bad wake-up call if something happens to that partner. And you hope it's at 60 and not at 30, because that's a even tougher thing. But I think feeling empowered that you can learn personal finance, and that there's actually a sort of 1.0 of personal finance that is pretty simple, and it's like spend less than you earn, invest, take advantage of automation, which a 401k is an example of. I know you and I are both entrepreneurs. We don't have a 401k, but like take the time, invest the 30 hours to set up the retirement plan for your business in your first year, and automate sending some money to it, once a quarter or once a year, and like as much as you can invest that time up front. And even if you make some $10,000 mistakes, the biggest mistake, because time is so valuable in compound interest and personal finance, is that if you wait 20 years to start, that is going to be way more costly than if you get started at 35 and you do one or two boneheaded things that cost you $10,000 or $20,000.
I'm wondering if we can go back to, so I think we have some entrepreneurial listeners. So can you unpack further what you just shared about what you might do as an entrepreneur if you don't have a 401k, and if you're maybe, a long-term entrepreneur, where would you start with them for my entrepreneur friends?
Yes. So I would say that there's a bunch of different retirement accounts that you can set up. There's a lot of pros and cons, and maybe to the point about overwhelm, I'm going to say I personally set up a SEP IRA. At some point in the future, that might not be the right retirement plan for my business, but SEP IRAs are really quick and easy to set up. I set mine up with Vanguard, which is a financial institution that I have a lot of trust in because they tend to offer low-fee products. I think sometimes people agonize over, should I go with Fidelity or should I go with Vanguard? That is honestly probably not going to make or break you in the long run. All of the big financial institutions, the name brand, the ones that that advertise during sporting events. They all are going to offer, relatively comparable personal finance products. So, and I would say Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, those are 3 good ones. You can set up a SEP IRA. I'm a big advocate of working with a CPA if you're an entrepreneur, because they will help you with your books and also kind of sign off that everything's kosher, which reduces the risk that you're going to get audited, or that you're going to, one of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make is they don't set aside money for their taxes on a quarterly basis, and then people can end up owing a lot of money in taxes. So I would say working with a CPA is going to help keep you from making some of those like really crippling mistakes where you spend all the revenue that you're bringing in. But the great thing about a SEP IRA is that through a lot of the retirement accounts through work, or that you can set up as an entrepreneur, you can actually contribute more in some cases than you could through a workplace plan. So that's one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur. You actually sometimes can contribute even more to your retirement. And even if you're just starting out maybe once a quarter, like set up that SEP IRA, you then have to decide what you're going to invest it in. There are things called target date funds. They are designed to be usable for the average American and to be really hands-off. So what a target date fund does is they're designed to say, okay, you're 35, you want to retire at 65, that's going to be in about 2050. We're going to invest you in a mixture of stocks and bonds, basically like the whole stock market. So they're not picking individual stocks, they're investing in a diversified way, and they're going to shift from stocks to bonds over time. So I, for example, could put all of my retirement, honestly, in a Vanguard Target Date 2050 fund, and it's going to shift my investments from riskier when I'm younger to more conservative when I'm older. And it's sort of a one and done. If you don't want the anxiety of how to invest, it's going to kind of do it in a broad-based way. It's what most workplace 401k plans default to. And so if you set up a SEP IRA, you pick a target date fund, and you make a date with yourself maybe once a quarter when you're doing your quarterly taxes to say, okay, I'm going to set aside whatever you can afford, but maybe it's $500 a quarter or $1,000 a quarter, even to start. For some of you that might be a lot of money, for other people not a lot of money.
Let's say, okay, now the business is going really well and I want to increase that amount, or now something has happened, like at the beginning of COVID, if you're an entrepreneur and your work adjusted and changed, can you adjust that there?
Yes, you can choose how much you want to contribute at any given time. You're not locked in. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I put that money into a retirement account, it's gone, I can't touch it until I'm 65. Well, that's not true. Yes, before 59 and a half, there are going to be taxes and penalties, but if you really get in a tight spot, you can access that money early. And if you sometimes generally easier through a workplace retirement plan, but you can also sometimes take a loan. So I just don't want people to feel like they're locking that money away, and you have ultimate flexibility. So what I actually do is I contribute less on a quarterly basis, and then at the end of the year, I look at my total numbers and I try to true up and say, okay, I see what I actually can afford based on how the business did, what my expenses are, and I'm going to put in an extra 10K maybe at the end of the year because I had a good year, or didn't have such a good year, so I'm not going to contribute that much to retirement this year. But I would say the muscle you want to build is that you're consistently contributing, so that even if it's $100 at the end of the year, that's part of your practice. And when the business comes back, or I was pregnant this year, the unexpected medical bills go away, you can contribute, more in the future.
And so in that example that you just gave us as the entrepreneur, you take the time up front to set it up, and then you take this time quarterly to contribute. But other than that, are there other things that you're doing throughout the year to look at that account, or is it kind of, to your point, automated, and that's just a part of your practice at those certain times? Because I think also people are like, oh no, now if I'm doing it, I have to manage even, something like what you described. Maybe if they haven't experienced that before, they think that if they're not using an advisor, that they somehow won't have the skills in the interim. So is there anything else you recommend in that interim to be looking and kind of knowing what's going on?
It's a great question. And I actually reflect back. One of the best personal finance lessons I learned was at our high school. We took econ senior year. I think we were required to. And we did a stock market simulation of some kind, like a lot of people do. And I don't remember much about that class, but I remember they said, only check your accounts once a year. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I need to be actively managing. There's actually a lot of data that trading less tends to lead to better long-term outcomes. You don't actually pay taxes if you're trading in a retirement account in general. But right now, for example, the market's down 25%. If you sell, you're kind of locking in that loss in a lot of ways. And you also will likely not be back in the market when and if we start to have a rally. The worst days of the market are generally really close in time to the best days of market performance. There's some JP Morgan research on this. So like in March 2020, the market was tanking because of COVID, and then the rally started, and it was like the second best day in the market was within like 7 days of the kind of big fall. So I think when we try to time the market or actively trade, we end up creating a lot of anxiety for ourselves and potentially losing out on gains. And I think just the big piece is that if you're investing for retirement and you're in your 30s, I tend to work with women in their 20s and 30s. So you're 30 years out from needing that money. And so worrying about the kind of, daily gyrations of the market is probably just going to create anxiety for yourself.
One of the things that it's also making me think about is back to some of these mindsets. What I want to think about now is, what I noticed, and this is on the spending side of things. What have you learned, or what are you using in maybe the courses or in your conversations, coaching conversations, to help people shift mindsets or maybe recognize patterns around, I'll call it keeping up with the Joneses? This, like, in your friend group feeling like, I've seen some of your content around bachelorette parties or in these girls groups joining in on things. I wonder if you can share any learnings around that you've noticed that help people shift mindset to maybe have uncomfortable conversations to say, I can't, based on my financial goals, I can't go do this, or how have you coached people around that concept?
I think the first step is just to have financial goals. So I think when you haven't sat down and done that deep work of what do I want to achieve, and it really should be your personal goals, and then you're marrying your money to what you want, because money is just a tool. It's not an end of itself. I've almost never worked with anyone whose goal was to have $10 million just because they wanted $10 million. The goal is, I want a house with a lakeside view, and I want to retire by 40 so that I can sit on a beach and drink pina coladas. And so I think when people can get really specific about those goals, and I've loved having so many women go through my classes, because one of the ones that really stuck out to me was a woman in my class said, I want to live somewhere where I can swim in the ocean every day. Someone else said, I want to work with women and girls, and they're a big fan of Michelle Obama, and I want to find a way to quit my job in tech and work for her. Or someone else has kind of said, hey, I grew up, I'm first generation American, I really want to buy my parents a house and eliminate their money stress. So whatever that looks like, when you articulate for you, what are the things that I want to achieve? And you put a number to those, and you can figure out, well, what do I need to do on a monthly or yearly basis to be able to get to those goals? It makes it a lot easier to say no to those superfluous things, that if you're saying, hey, do I want to put $500 a month towards my goal of retirement or buying a new car or whatever, or do I want to go on that bachelorette party? And sometimes the answer is going to be, this is someone really close to me, this is going to be some bachelorette weekends, or weddings, I should say, maybe more so than bachelorettes, have been like the best weekends of my life. And they were really worth it because I got to celebrate with friends and family. Other times it's like, no, I'd rather pay off my student loans in the next 5 years than go to that event. And so I think getting really real about what you want is the first step.
Okay, you were talking about student loans. So this is also something very active on listeners' minds and just people from different experiences. This impacts our personal household too. My husband's a chiropractor, and there's a student loan out there. And so we've learned this as well. I'm curious, any One of the things that I often find in conversations about student loans has been these trade-off conversations. Some people are really comfortable with the debt being there over time at certain interest rates, of course. Maybe we can talk about that. And they're just used to saying if you're an MD or these certain roles, then of course you're going to have student loans and it's just part of your, monthly payment and you're used to it. And others really want to target and attack that debt to be debt free, to be able to do other things. And so maybe it's not quite as simple as that, but what have you found in the conversations? What would be your advice to sitting down and considering the extent to which paying off the student loan makes sense and the extent to which investing makes sense? Can both things be true at the same time?
Yes, and as someone, who paid off about $185K in student loans between undergrad and grad school, I definitely am a big believer. So Dave Ramsey, some people probably know, says pay off all your debt, don't invest until you've paid off debt. And I think that, I'm from the generation of people who had six figures in student loans from grad school plus undergrad. If I had waited to pay off my student loans, I wouldn't have started investing until, hard to say when, but 30s, let's call it. And so I would have missed out on 8 years of compound interest. And I'm a big believer that if your student loans are relatively low interest rate, and I sort of define that as below 5%, a lot of people might have refinanced loans in the kind of period before this year as interest rates have gone up. And so, it was not uncommon to be able to refinance student loans at 2-3%. I got all mine below 4% by refinancing. And so if you're in a situation where you have debt at 2.5 or 3.5%, paying it off slowly can make a lot of sense. The higher that student loan interest rate is, and if you have credit card debt or a personal loan, that's generally going to be the first thing you want to pay off. And in that case, I would say it doesn't make as much sense to invest at the same time, because the idea is that in the stock market, it's average about a 7% adjusted for inflation return. Maybe 10% is that real return or nominal return, and then you adjust down for inflation. If you're paying 7% interest on your loans, you're just breaking even there. And this year, the stock market's down 25% about year to date. And so, the stock market doesn't have these even returns. Your student loan interest rate is generally fixed if you have a fixed rate. Or if you have a fixed rate loan, you're paying the same interest rate every year. It's guaranteed that you owe 7% or you owe 5.7%, whatever that is. Versus the stock market returns are variable. And so the higher your student loan interest rate is, the more probable that you might have many years potentially where you're paying more in interest than you're earning on that money. Right. And so that's why the lower you can get that interest rate, if you can get it below 5%, I'm a big advocate of paying it off slowly. There is that psychological impact. So if it's weighing on you and you're like, I just want to be debt free, even if you have a 1% interest rate, pay it off. It's not worth losing sleep at night. And that's part of why personal finance is so personal. Right. But in general, I'm a big fan of investing while paying off debt. And, you can also take somewhere in between. I paid my loans off way more quickly than I had to, even though I had them at a 4% interest rate. But I made sure that I was saving some for retirement first. And then when I got bonuses or when I started this business and kind of had extra income, I put that towards the student loans. And part of that was because I wanted to quit my job and become an entrepreneur, and I didn't want to have a fixed debt payment that was hanging over my head when I had uncertain income. So I paid it all off 2 years ago before I kind of started on this venture full time. So there's lots of gray in there, but definitely a fan of investing while you're paying off debt.
And I hear that, hence your company name, it's personal. Because it isn't there's this knowledge that you have, and what I see that's becoming even more clear to me. It was clear when I was looking through your content too, but that you have a heart and a passion for this, and both, of course, the knowledge and expertise from highly vetted universities, and this accessibility that when you said you have a heart of a teacher, it's so clear to me, because I think that there may be many people with similar knowledge set, but you're so well equipped to be doing exactly what you're doing because it's accessible and people are able to feel comfortable in having those conversations with you. To what do you attribute that accessibility, that ability to take those complex concepts, make them seem so I feel calm talking to you about this even now, Any thoughts on that?
First, it's such a compliment, and I really appreciate that. And a tough question. I was a voracious reader as a kid. You probably even know this about me, although I had hidden it somewhat by the time we got to middle school. But they say that reading fiction, you're putting yourself in the shoes of lots of different people, and it's supposed to make you more empathetic. So maybe that has some role in that, because I was that kid that got grounded from reading. So that was definitely a big part of my childhood. But second, I think I've had a lot of diverse life experiences. So, and I think we've kind of alluded, we went to a private high school where there was a lot of wealth, but I think there was also probably a lot of people who might have felt like you and me, where you're like, oh, well, this person has more money than I do. And so I think that growing up in a context where you were around money, but maybe everybody is comparing themselves, and I think that that's just high school in general. You know, you're trying to orient yourself in the world, and I think just realize you never know the sort of money story that someone has, and when you really start to get to know someone, sometimes you will be shocked by some of the stuff that's happening in the background. And so I just try to come from a place of everybody's doing the best that they can, and money is stressful for just about everybody. So, you know, this shouldn't be a place that makes you feel bad about it. It should be empowering.
I think I also might add, from what I see, is this desire for true impact and helping others. Like that combined with the empathy allows you to kind of meet people where they are. And it's that same desire you were talking about, the nonprofit sector and education, like you are doing that in empowering people that think about how many lives and even generations that impacts when they're able to set up a college saving plan for their own children, so they're not burdened with the same debt that maybe we experienced, or different things like that. Just that knowledge, it's when we know better, we do better, having that driving force that I see. Okay, I kind of have a personal obsession with productivity. This is maybe my achiever desire, and maybe this comes from some of our upbringing as well. But I love reading organizational psychology, personal psychology, learning, all that stuff. And I'm curious about, from your perspective as now an entrepreneur and a new mom, what kind of a day in the life of the entrepreneur looks like. I know as a mom as well that it's adjusted greatly, but what are the things that you prioritize in your daily life to keep everything rolling in the business and experience the full life that you want as an entrepreneur and a mom?
Well, thank you for that question, because I think one of the hardest parts of being an entrepreneur that people don't talk about is that you have to create all your own structure. And was listening to one of your earlier interviews with Kimberly Borges, where she was kind of talking about waking up and sort of staring at that blank page. So what I've tried to do, first of all, have set my goals for the year. And a lot of them, honestly, right now are focused on kind of the number of people that I'm able to reach and impact, and also just bringing in revenue, because as an entrepreneur, you still have to pay your bills. And so on a monthly basis and on a weekly basis, like every Friday in the afternoon, I plan out my upcoming week, and I set up blocks of time. And my goal is to spend about a third of my time executing or delivering on classes, a third of my time on thought leadership, and then a third of my time is sort of more miscellaneous, so some sort of mixture of operations, like fixing my website, responding to email, which sometimes is prospects and marketing more type stuff, and sometimes it's like helping someone troubleshoot how to get into the website. But trying to make sure that I'm keeping my time and about those chunks, and having standing times on the calendar where I know on Tuesdays at 3:30 p.m. I'm going to review homework assignments, or on Thursdays I'm going to send follow-up emails, because I do a lot of speaking events, and so it's a great way I found to get my name out there. So reaching out to different organizations that sometimes have reached out to me, or sometimes places that I'm interested in speaking, to set that up. So trying to have as much structure as I can, so that I don't wake up and have to figure out, well, what am I doing with my day to day?
That is so helpful. One thing that resonated with me from that, this might get into one of the challenges that you're currently working through, but first I'm curious about this, because I feel like we might be aligned in this area. So the word marketing, sometimes as an entrepreneur that has a impact focus or maybe a socially minded focus and sees the different ways that other entrepreneurs are marketing, may have mixed feelings about even that word or maybe not. I'm wondering how you like to think about marketing, and then maybe any of the challenges around that you're kind of trying to figure out.
Marketing is so tough. I would say I don't necessarily even have as tough of a time with the word, but putting yourself out there is really scary. So the first time I posted something to Instagram, which is my primary marketing channel, was terrifying. And it's gotten a lot easier over time. And I think what I try to think about is, how can I have a sticky point of view that's sort of differentiated? And then what are the questions that are really on people's minds? And how can I create content that's really helping people? And I think sometimes the Instagram algorithm has hacked my brain, and pre-kid, I would say I have a lot better boundaries over the past 4 months, and took a bunch of time off post-baby. But it would be easy sometimes to look at people that have more followers, other things, and kind of be comparative. I think I've let a lot of that go and am focusing on, okay, what's the audience of people that I know that I can really serve? And I'm not trying to talk to everybody. I'm trying to talk to women with grad degrees who are generally in the first 5 to 10 years of their career. And by being narrow in that focus, I kind of know my Instagram account isn't going to be for everybody. So I'll give examples sometimes to get feedback from people that are like, oh, it would be so nice to have, a 6-figure income. That is the average person that I work with. Some of them have 6 figures in debt as well, which people don't want to talk about, or multiple 6 figures in debt if they're a physician in particular. But that is my audience. And so I think that the struggle for me is in streamlining those marketing funnels. It's definitely not what my background is in. I was on the strategy side of things. I have operations experience and people management, but definitely never worked in marketing before. And I think email is really powerful. They say with social media, you're renting those names. You don't own them. Versus with email, you own them. And I think maybe to your point about marketing feeling bad, if I'm going to send someone an email, I want it to be value add. I want to create products that are high value, but I think also I'm a 1-person team. I have 2 contractors who help me. And so there's limits to what I can do. And sometimes I'm putting stuff out there that isn't perfect, and it makes me feel anxious that it's, still that work in progress. But I think sometimes putting it out there and getting feedback is hard. And I'll say, if anyone listening, I'm looking to talk to experts in email marketing and getting smarter and better at that. So it's something that I'm wanting to streamline some of those funnels and make things a little bit less manual than they are right now.
It's so helpful to hear that. I think that for me, similarly, maybe not the term itself, but maybe like the connection to the sales side of it. I think you hit on something that for me presents as a recovering perfectionist that pops up its head to say, like, it has to be this way. However, the podcast I've referenced several times on other episodes has really helped me, because it's an area I had no idea really how to do and had to explore and figure out, has helped me practice that art of shipping. Seth Godin talks a lot about that, about not overcoming fear, but dancing with fear. Not Sheryl Sandberg's "What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?" Although I also like that question. But even as you are afraid, what are you going to do to kind of share out with the world? And so I think this perspective of really knowing yourself and knowing why you're an entrepreneur and what it is that you're wanting to see shift in the world or in your niche really helps to take some of the challenge out of different mindsets around marketing and sales feeling out of reach, especially as a team of one in contractors, in that solopreneurship, I think is the term. Okay, I'm curious about this. If as you were developing maybe your initial, do you have one course right now?
I have 2, and one is the live course. It's 10 weeks and is sort of the flagship offering, and I have a couple different iterations of it. But then I also just launched a Saving for College course that's on demand that has been really interesting and I've learned a lot from as well.
Okay, we'll put all the links to the courses and whatnot in the episode description. One thing that was making me think about is when you first started building the outline for the course, were there any lessons learned around that from going from beginning to now a successful course out there serving people? Any takeaways from that? And then we'll get to like the books and recommendation stuff.
Great. I'd say the big thing is just iterating. So I put it out there and got feedback and kind of noticed the places that I was consistently getting questions that the materials weren't clear, and read a lot of books to not try to reinvent the wheel, but I think being responsive to student feedback was the biggest part. The course looks very different now than when I first started.
So the ongoing iteration process. Okay, Eryn, thank you so much. We're going to shift to book recommendations, any other recommendations, and where people can find you.
So my favorite personal finance book, and I actually assigned some chapters from it in my class, is A Simple Path to Wealth. One of the other books, and this one's just kind of fun, and I'm a history nerd, so I really loved the Robert Caro books that are about LBJ and learned a lot about leadership and also U.S. government from them. So they're pretty wonky, but highly recommend if you want to learn more about how the Senate works or kind of thinking about power and leadership overall.
Any other recommendations? And do you want to tell people, I'll put the links to the courses, but anything else about your courses or why you might want people to reach out to you on certain topics or things like that?
Yes. So would love if people want to follow along at her.personal.finance on Instagram. And also would be happy to connect on LinkedIn. I'm trying to grow my platform there as well. I teach primarily 10-week live courses. My next one's starting on October 11th, so by the time this comes out, that class is probably just about to begin, but we'll be teaching again in January, and I would love for people to reach out who are kind of experts in learning, because always looking to make the curriculum better, but again, like I talked about, looking for help in email marketing, and then the places that I think I can really help are creating a lot of content on student loans, especially with all the changes and rules going on. And then kind of, I know it's a scary economic time. We're in a recession, interest rates are rising, what's going on? So if people just have a lot of fear about getting started, as we kind of talked about, would love to help you get over the edge with that.
Wonderful. Eryn, thank you so much. This was so fun to just reconnect and hear the amazing work you're doing. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and just your heart and passion for this work. It was such a delight to learn from you. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.